Virgin Cowboy was mocked for his bride in town, but that night 200 natives crowned her queen. You're about to witness one of the most incredible stories of love, prejudice, and divine justice from the American frontier. A tale that will show you how a shy cowboy's pure love for an unusual bride led to one of the most extraordinary nights in Western history. If you're ready to discover how 200 Native Americans transformed ridicule into reverence and crowned an unlikely queen in the middle of nowhere, make sure to hit that like button right now, subscribe to our channel for more amazing frontier stories, and ring that notification bell so you never miss these incredible tales of the untamed West. Now let's journey back to 1887 in the rough frontier town of Sunset Ridge, Colorado Territory, where 26-year-old Tommy Henderson was about to bring his new bride home to face the judgment of an entire community. The dusty streets of Sunset Ridge shimmered in the late afternoon heat as Thomas Henderson guided his weathered wagon down Main Street, his calloused hands gripping the reins with nervous tension that had nothing to do with controlling his two gentle draft horses. Beside him sat his bride of exactly 3 days, Maria Elena Vasquez Henderson, her dark eyes taking in the sights of what would be her new home with a mixture of curiosity and quiet dignity that had already stolen Tommy's heart completely. Tommy was a man who had spent most of his 26 years feeling like an outsider in his own life. Born to homesteaders who had died when he was barely 16, he had inherited their small ranch on the outskirts of Sunset Ridge, and had spent the last decade working the land alone, gradually expanding his holdings through hard work, careful saving, and an almost obsessive dedication to the cattle and horses that comprised his primary companionship. Unlike most of the other young men in the territory, Tommy had never developed a taste for saloons, gambling, or the kind of casual relationships that seemed to define masculine culture on the frontier. His shyness around women was legendary in Sunset Ridge, where the unmarried cowboys and ranch hands had long ago given up trying to drag Tommy into town for Saturday night revelries. They called him Virgin Tommy behind his back, sometimes with affection, but often with the kind of mockery that men reserve for those who don't conform to expected patterns of behavior. Tommy was aware of his nickname and the whispered comments about his inexperience with women, but he had never been bothered enough by their opinions to change his ways. That all changed 6 months ago, when Tommy had traveled to Santa Fe on business related to a cattle sale and had encountered Maria Elena in circumstances that seemed almost providential in their serendipity. She had been working as a seamstress in a shop owned by her elderly aunt, supporting not only herself but also her younger sister, who was recovering from a serious illness that had left the family with devastating medical expenses. Maria Elena was 24 years old, with the dark hair and olive complexion that spoke of her mixed Spanish and Native American heritage. Her mother had been from the Pueblo people, her father a Spanish settler, and she carried herself with a quiet pride that reflected both cultures. She was not conventionally beautiful by the standards that most frontier communities applied to women, being taller than average, more serious in demeanor than the giggling girls that cowboys usually pursued, and possessing an intelligence that some men found intimidating rather than attractive. But Tommy had been drawn to Maria Elena from the moment he first saw her, not despite these qualities, but because of them. He recognized in her the same sense of being set apart from others that had defined his own experience, and he was moved by the dedication she showed to her family responsibilities and the dignity with which she carried herself despite difficult circumstances. Their courtship had been conducted primarily through letters over the course of 5 months, with Tommy making 3 additional trips to Santa Fe to spend time with Maria Elena and gradually work up the courage to propose marriage. When he finally did ask for her hand, it was with the understanding that their union would be based not on passion or social expectations, but on mutual respect, shared values, and the kind of deep affection that grows from truly knowing and appreciating another person. Maria Elena had accepted Tommy's proposal not because she was desperate to escape her circumstances, but because she recognized in him a kindness and steadiness that was rare among men, and because his letters had revealed a thoughtful, literate person whose character impressed her far more than conventional romantic gestures might have done. Their wedding had been a simple ceremony in Santa Fe, attended only by Maria Elena's aunt and sister, and witnessed by a local justice of the peace. Now, as their wagon rolled down the main street of Sunset Ridge, Tommy felt his anxiety building with each passing storefront. He had written to several acquaintances in town announcing his marriage, but he had not provided many details about his bride beyond her name and the fact that she came from Santa Fe. He had deliberately avoided mentioning her mixed heritage or her family's economic circumstances, not because he was ashamed of these things, but because he knew how quickly gossip spread in a small frontier community, and he wanted Maria Elena to have a chance to make her own first impression. The first sign that their arrival was generating attention came from the group of cowboys lounging outside McKenna's saloon, the establishment that served as the unofficial social center for the town's male population. Tommy recognized most of the men by sight, having grown up with several of them and done business with others over the years. As the wagon passed, he heard one of them call out, "Well, well, if it ain't Virgin Tommy come back from his honeymoon." The comment was followed by a burst of laughter that was audible even over the sound of the wagon wheels and the horses' hooves on the packed dirt street. Tommy felt his face burning with embarrassment, not for himself, but for Maria Elena, who was experiencing her first taste of the kind of reception she might expect in her new home. Maria Elena, however, showed no visible reaction to the crude comment, maintaining her composed expression while taking note of everything around her with the careful observation of someone who understood that first impressions would be crucial in establishing her place in this community. She had dealt with prejudice and social challenges before, and she had learned that dignity and patience were often more effective responses than anger or defensiveness. As they continued down the street toward Henderson's general store, where Tommy needed to pick up supplies and introduce his wife to the store's owner, George Henderson, no relation, despite the shared surname, more people began to take notice of their passage. Women emerged from shops to get a better look at the mysterious bride that Tommy Henderson had brought back from Santa Fe, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism as they observed Maria Elena's appearance and demeanor. The whispers began almost immediately, carried on the afternoon breeze in the way that gossip spreads through small communities with the speed and persistence of wildfire. "Look at her skin. She's got Indian blood for sure. What kind of woman would marry Tommy Henderson? She's older than I expected. Probably couldn't find anyone else to take her. He must have paid her family to marry him." Tommy heard enough of these comments to feel his anger rising, but Maria Elena placed a gentle hand on his arm in a gesture that managed to be both calming and supportive. "Let them talk," she said quietly, her voice carrying the slight accent that reflected her Spanish heritage. "Their words say more about them than they do about us." Their first official stop was Henderson's General Store, a rambling establishment that served as both a commercial center and an informal gathering place where news and gossip were exchanged along with goods and services. George Henderson was a man in his 50s who had built his business through fair dealing and community involvement, and Tommy had always enjoyed a cordial relationship with him despite their lack of family connection. When Tommy helped Maria Elena down from the wagon and escorted her into the store, the reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as the assembled customers turned to stare at the couple, their faces showing the kind of naked curiosity and judgment that small communities often direct toward newcomers, particularly those who don't fit expected patterns. George Henderson himself emerged from behind the counter to greet them, his expression carefully neutral as he took in the details of Tommy's bride. Henderson was a politician as well as a merchant, and he understood the importance of maintaining good relationships with all his customers, regardless of his personal opinions about their choices. "Tommy," Henderson said with forced heartiness, extending his hand in greeting. "Welcome back, and this must be the new Mrs. Henderson." Tommy performed the introductions with as much dignity as he could manage, acutely aware of the audience that was hanging on every word. "George, I'd like you to meet my wife, Maria Elena. Maria Elena, this is George Henderson, who runs the finest general store in the territory." Maria Elena inclined her head graciously and extended her hand to George Henderson with the poise of a woman accustomed to social situations. "Mr. Henderson, it's a pleasure to meet you. Thomas has spoken of you often in his letters." The mention of letters caused a subtle stir among the listening customers, as it suggested a courtship that had been more thoughtful and extended than the quick frontier marriages that often occurred between strangers. However, it also raised questions about why Tommy had needed to conduct his courtship through correspondence rather than finding a local bride. As Tommy conducted his business in the store, selecting supplies needed for the ranch and arranging for larger items to be delivered later, Maria Elena found herself the subject of intense scrutiny from the other women present. Their examination was thorough and largely disapproving, taking in her practical traveling dress, her lack of fashionable accessories, and most particularly the features that marked her mixed heritage. One woman, whom Tommy recognized as Mrs. Dorothy Whitman, the banker's wife, and one of the most influential arbiters of social acceptability in Sunset Ridge, made no effort to lower her voice as she commented to her companion, "Well, I can see why poor Tommy had to go all the way to Santa Fe to find someone willing to marry him. No respectable girl from around here would have had him." The comment was clearly intended to be overheard, and it had the desired effect of drawing uncomfortable chuckles from several other customers while making Tommy's face burn with embarrassment and anger. Maria Elena, however, continued to maintain her composure, though Tommy noticed a slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she was not as unaffected by the rudeness as she appeared. The situation grew worse when they visited the post office to arrange for mail forwarding and encountered Reverend Samuel Morse, the local minister whose approval was considered essential for social acceptance in the community. Reverend Morse was a man with strong opinions about proper Christian behavior and the importance of maintaining moral standards in frontier communities. When Tommy introduced Maria Elena to the Reverend, the older man's reaction was immediately and obviously disapproving. After a perfunctory handshake, Reverend Morse addressed Tommy with the kind of stern concern that church leaders often reserve for parishioners who have strayed from acceptable paths. "Thomas, I must say I'm surprised by your choice of bride," Reverend Morse said, making no effort to include Maria Elena in the conversation. "It's unfortunate that you felt it necessary to seek a wife outside our own Christian community, particularly one whose background might raise questions about her suitability for frontier life." The Reverend's words were carefully chosen to avoid direct accusations, but their meaning was clear to everyone present. He was questioning both Maria Elena's religious faith and her racial heritage in terms that suggested moral judgment rather than simple curiosity. Tommy felt his temper flaring at the Reverend's rudeness, but before he could respond, Maria Elena stepped forward with quiet dignity. "Reverend Morse, I was raised in the Catholic faith and have been a practicing Christian my entire life. I hope that we'll have opportunities to discuss our shared faith and perhaps find ways that I can contribute to the spiritual life of this community." Her response was perfectly calculated to demonstrate both her religious credentials and her willingness to participate constructively in community life. But it seemed to have little effect on Reverend Morse's disapproval. "The Catholic Church has very different interpretations of Christian doctrine," he replied stiffly. I'm sure you understand that our community values are based on Protestant principles. The conversation continued in this vein for several more uncomfortable minutes, with Reverend Morse making it clear that Maria Elena would need to prove herself worthy of acceptance rather than being welcomed as Tommy's chosen bride. By the time they left the post office, Tommy was seething with anger at the treatment his wife had received, while Maria Elena remained outwardly calm despite the obvious stress of the encounter. Their final stop in town was at the boarding house run by Mrs. Sarah McKinley, where they planned to stay the night before traveling to Tommy's ranch the following morning. Mrs. McKinley was a widow who had built a reputation for running a clean, respectable establishment that catered to travelers and temporary residents who needed accommodation in Sunset Ridge. When Tommy and Maria Elena arrived at the boarding house, they found several other guests gathering in the front parlor for the evening meal that was included with their lodging. The group included a traveling salesman, 2 cowboys from a neighboring ranch, and a young schoolteacher who was new to the area. Tommy had hoped that this would provide an opportunity for Maria Elena to meet some people who might be more welcoming than those they had encountered earlier in town. Unfortunately, word of their arrival and the reactions it had generated had already spread throughout the community, and the atmosphere in the boarding house was charged with curiosity and barely concealed hostility. The other guests made little effort to include Maria Elena in their conversation, instead directing their comments to Tommy, while making it clear that they considered his choice of bride to be both puzzling and inappropriate. The traveling salesman, a man named Jackson Peters, who made his living through charm and social connections, was particularly pointed in his observations. "Tommy, I've got to say, you've surprised everyone with this marriage of yours. Most folks figured you'd end up with one of the local girls, maybe the Johnson girl, or young Mary Beth from the Patterson Ranch. What made you decide to look so far afield?" The question was posed with false friendliness, but its implications were clear. Why hadn't Tommy chosen a wife from among the available white Protestant women in the local community? The suggestion that he had somehow settled for less desirable goods was unmistakable. Tommy's response was firm but controlled. "I married Maria Elena because she's the finest woman I've ever met, and I consider myself the luckiest man in the territory to have won her affection. Anyone who takes the time to know her will understand why I fell in love with her." This declaration of love and respect was met with uncomfortable silence, as if Tommy had violated some unspoken rule about how frontier marriages were supposed to be discussed. The idea that he might have married for love rather than convenience or desperation seemed to confuse and unsettle his audience. As the evening progressed, the social dynamics in the boarding house became increasingly uncomfortable. Maria Elena was largely ignored by the other women present, while the men seemed to view her as an object of curiosity rather than as a person worthy of respect and inclusion. The conversations were filled with coded references to her background and speculation about the circumstances that had led to her marriage to Tommy. The situation reached its nadir during dinner when one of the cowboys, emboldened by the drinks he had consumed before the meal, made a comment that crossed the line from rudeness to outright insult. "Tommy, I got to ask," he said with a drunken grin, "was she the best you could afford, or was she the only one desperate enough to take you?" The comment was met with shocked silence, as even the most gossipy members of the group recognized that the cowboy had gone too far. Tommy rose from his chair with murder in his eyes, his hands clenched into fists and his face flushed with rage that had been building throughout the day. Before Tommy could respond with violence, however, Maria Elena placed her hand on his arm and rose gracefully from her own chair. Her voice was calm and controlled, but there was a strength in it that commanded attention from everyone in the room. "Sir," she said, addressing the drunken cowboy directly, "I can see that you've had too much to drink and perhaps don't realize how your words sound to others. I'll assume that's the case and forgive your rudeness." But I want everyone here to understand something. I married Thomas Henderson because he's the finest man I've ever known, and I consider myself blessed beyond measure to be his wife. If that makes me desperate in your eyes, then I'm proud to be desperate for a man who treats me with kindness, respect, and genuine affection." She paused to look around the room, meeting the eyes of each person present with steady dignity. "I know that my appearance and my background have raised questions among some people in this community. I understand that prejudice and fear often make people suspicious of those who are different from themselves. But I want you to know that I came here with hope in my heart and a sincere desire to be a good neighbor and a contributing member of this community." Maria Elena's words were delivered with such grace and sincerity that they seemed to shame even the most hostile members of her audience. Several people looked down at their plates in embarrassment, while others exchanged glances that suggested they were reconsidering their initial judgments. "I don't expect to be accepted immediately," Maria Elena continued, "but I hope that over time you'll come to know me as a person, rather than judging me based on assumptions about my heritage or my marriage. Until then, I'll do my best to prove myself worthy of the love that Thomas has shown me and the opportunity that this community represents." With that, she sat back down and resumed her meal as if nothing had happened, leaving the room in stunned silence. Tommy looked at his wife with an expression of such love and admiration that several of the women present found themselves reconsidering their initial dismissal of the couple's relationship. The remainder of the evening passed in relative quiet, with most of the boarding house guests retiring early rather than continuing conversations that had become awkward and uncomfortable. Tommy and Maria Elena spent some time on the front porch, talking quietly about the day's experiences and their hopes for the future. "I'm sorry about how people treated you today," Tommy said, his voice heavy with guilt and anger. "I knew there might be some prejudice, but I didn't expect it to be so open and cruel." Maria Elena smiled and took his hand in hers, a gesture that conveyed both affection and strength. "Thomas, I've dealt with prejudice my entire life. What happened today was unpleasant, but it wasn't unexpected. The important thing is that we face these challenges together and that we don't let other people's narrow-mindedness poison our own happiness." She paused to look up at the star-filled sky, then continued with quiet conviction. "Besides, I have faith that eventually people will judge us by our actions rather than their preconceptions. We'll build a good life together, and in time, this community will come to accept us for who we really are." Tommy marveled at his wife's resilience and wisdom, recognizing that her strength came from years of experience navigating a world that often treated her as an outsider. Her ability to maintain dignity and hope in the face of hostility was something he was still learning to understand and appreciate. As they prepared to retire for the night, neither Tommy nor Maria Elena had any idea that the events of the following day would transform their situation in ways that no one in Sunset Ridge could possibly have anticipated. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with the crisp air and brilliant sunshine that made Colorado Territory famous for its natural beauty. Tommy and Maria Elena rose early, had a quiet breakfast with the other boarding house guests, and prepared to make the journey to Tommy's ranch, which was located about 15 miles outside of town, in a valley that provided excellent grazing for cattle and horses. As they loaded their belongings into the wagon and prepared to leave Sunset Ridge, word of their departure spread through the town with the usual efficiency of small community gossip networks. By the time they were ready to drive away, a small crowd had gathered to observe their departure, their faces showing the mixture of curiosity and judgment that had characterized the previous day's encounters. The journey to Tommy's ranch took them through some of the most beautiful country in the territory, following a winding trail that passed through rolling hills covered with wildflowers, crossed several clear-running streams, and eventually opened into the protected valley where Tommy had built his home and established his cattle operation. Tommy's ranch was modest but well maintained, consisting of a comfortable log cabin, a sturdy barn, several outbuildings, and corrals that housed his horses and provided shelter for cattle during harsh weather. The property showed evidence of years of careful work and gradual improvement, reflecting Tommy's methodical approach to building something lasting and valuable. For Maria Elena, who had spent most of her life in the Pueblo-style adobe houses of Santa Fe, the log cabin represented something entirely new and different. But as Tommy helped her down from the wagon and showed her around her new home, she found herself genuinely impressed by the thought and care that had gone into creating a comfortable and practical living space. The cabin's interior revealed Tommy's bachelor lifestyle, but it also showed his fundamental cleanliness and organization. The rooms were simply furnished but comfortable, with handmade wooden furniture that demonstrated considerable skill in carpentry. There were books on shelves, suggesting Tommy's literacy and intellectual interests, and the kitchen was well equipped for someone who had learned to cook for himself during his years of solitary living. "It's not fancy," Tommy said apologetically as he showed Maria Elena through the rooms, "but it's solid and comfortable. I've been working on improvements for years, and now that you're here, we can make whatever changes you think would make it more suitable for both of us." Maria Elena moved through the cabin with evident appreciation, running her hands along the smooth wood surfaces and examining the craftsmanship that had gone into every detail. "Thomas, it's wonderful," she said with genuine warmth. "I can see the love and care you've put into creating this home. I'm honored to share it with you." As they settled into their new life together, Tommy and Maria Elena began the process of learning to live as a married couple while also adapting to the routines and demands of ranch life. Maria Elena proved to be remarkably capable at the various tasks required for frontier living, bringing skills from her own background that complemented Tommy's ranching expertise. She was an excellent cook who could create delicious meals from simple ingredients, a skilled seamstress who could make and mend clothing and household items, and a knowledgeable gardener who understood how to grow vegetables and herbs in the challenging climate of the high desert. Most importantly, she proved to be a willing and capable partner in the heavier work of ranch management, learning to handle horses and cattle with confidence and skill. During their first week of married life, Tommy and Maria Elena were visited by several of their nearest neighbors, ranchers who lived within a few miles of Tommy's property and who had maintained cordial relationships with him over the years. These visits were ostensibly social calls meant to welcome Maria Elena to the community, but they were also opportunities for the neighbors to satisfy their curiosity about Tommy's mysterious bride. The reception Maria Elena received from these neighboring ranchers was notably warmer and more accepting than what she had experienced in town. Ranch families understood the practical value of a capable partner, and they could see immediately that Maria Elena possessed the skills and temperament needed to thrive in frontier conditions. Her mixed heritage was noted but not commented upon, as frontier communities tended to be more concerned with practical abilities than social prejudices. However, the neighbors also brought news from town that was less encouraging. The gossip about Tommy's marriage had intensified during the week since their arrival, with various rumors circulating about Maria Elena's background, the circumstances of their courtship, and the reasons why Tommy had felt it necessary to seek a wife outside the local community. Some of the stories being told were merely unkind, suggesting that Maria Elena was older than she appeared, or that she had been unable to find a husband among her own people. Others were more malicious, implying that she came from a disreputable family, or that Tommy had been somehow deceived about her character or circumstances. The most hurtful rumors, however, were those that suggested the marriage was somehow invalid or inappropriate because of Maria Elena's mixed heritage. These stories, often promoted by people like Reverend Morse and Mrs. Whitman, implied that Tommy had somehow betrayed his community and his race by marrying someone who was not purely white and Protestant. "I'm sorry you have to hear this," said James Morrison, Tommy's nearest neighbor and one of his few close friends, "but I thought you should know what's being said so you can decide how to respond." Tommy's jaw tightened with anger as he listened to the catalogue of rumors and gossip, but Maria Elena remained calm and thoughtful. "Thomas," she said quietly, "we knew this might happen. The important thing is that we don't let other people's prejudices change who we are or how we live our lives." As the days turned into weeks, Tommy and Maria Elena settled into the rhythms of ranch life and began to build the kind of partnership that made frontier marriages successful. They worked together during the day, sharing the various tasks required to maintain their livestock and property, and spent their evenings reading, talking, and planning for the future. Their relationship deepened during this period, evolving from the respectful affection of their courtship into something richer and more intimate. Tommy marveled daily at his good fortune in finding a wife who shared his values and interests while bringing her own unique strengths and perspectives to their partnership. Maria Eleanor, for her part, found herself falling genuinely in love with her husband as she observed his kindness, integrity, and the gentle way he treated both her and the animals in their care. She had married Tommy initially for practical reasons and out of respect for his character, but she was discovering that genuine romantic love could grow from such solid foundations. One evening, about a month after their arrival at the ranch, Tommy and Maria Elena were sitting on their front porch, enjoying the cool air after a hot day, when they noticed an unusual disturbance among their horses. The animals in the corral were restless and alert, their ears pricked forward as if they sensed something approaching that was beyond human perception. At first, Tommy assumed that predators might be in the area, perhaps wolves or mountain lions that sometimes threatened livestock in this region. He rose from his chair and reached for the rifle that he always kept near the door, scanning the surrounding landscape for signs of danger. But as the minutes passed, it became clear that whatever was approaching was not predatory wildlife. The horses' behavior suggested curiosity rather than fear, and there was a rhythmic quality to the sounds they were detecting that seemed more consistent with approaching riders than with hunting animals. Then, just as the sun was setting behind the western mountains and painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, Tommy and Maria Elena saw something that left them speechless with amazement. Emerging from the shadows of the surrounding hills came a procession of Native American riders, their numbers growing larger and larger as more figures appeared from various directions. At first count, Tommy estimated perhaps 50 riders, but as the procession continued to emerge from the landscape, the numbers climbed to 100, then 150, and finally to what appeared to be at least 200 mounted warriors representing multiple tribes and bands. The sight was both magnificent and terrifying, a demonstration of Native American presence and power that was unprecedented in the experience of local white settlers. The riders moved with the discipline and coordination of an organized force, but their approach was measured and ceremonial rather than aggressive. As the procession drew closer to the ranch, Tommy could make out details that both reassured and amazed him. The riders were dressed in their finest regalia, with feathers, beadwork, and painted symbols that indicated the formal and significant nature of their visit. Their horses were beautifully decorated with similar ceremonial elements, and the overall impression was one of celebration rather than warfare. At the head of the procession rode a man whose bearing and ornamentation clearly marked him as a chief of considerable importance. He appeared to be perhaps 60 years old, with long grey hair braided with leather and beads, and he carried himself with the dignity and authority of someone accustomed to command and respect. When the procession reached the boundary of Tommy's property, it came to a halt in a formation that displayed both military precision and ceremonial significance. The riders arranged themselves in a great semicircle facing the ranch house, their horses prancing and dancing with excitement while their riders maintained perfect discipline and control. The chief, at the head of the procession, dismounted from his horse and walked slowly toward the ranch house, his movements deliberate and ceremonial. When he reached a position midway between his followers and the front porch, where Tommy and Maria Elena stood transfixed, he stopped and raised his hand in what was clearly a gesture of peaceful greeting. "Thomas Henderson and Maria Elena Henderson," the chief called out in clear, accented English. "I am Chief Running Eagle of the Ute people, and I speak for the assembled representatives of the Ute, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Apache nations. We have come to honor the marriage of the good white man and the daughter of the people." The chief's words hit Maria Elena with the force of a physical blow, as she realized that these Native American leaders knew something about her heritage that she had never shared with Tommy or anyone else in Colorado Territory. Her mother had indeed been from the Pueblo people of New Mexico, but Maria Elena had never spoken publicly about the specific nature of her Native American ancestry. Chief Running Eagle continued his formal address, his voice carrying easily across the distance between them. "Maria Elena, daughter of Morning Star of the Taos Pueblo, your mother's people have spoken to our people, and word has spread among all the tribes of the mountains and plains. You have married a man who sees your worth and honors your heritage, and for this we have come to celebrate your union and proclaim your rightful place among the people." As the chief spoke, other riders began to dismount and move forward in a carefully choreographed ceremony that had obviously been planned well in advance. They carried with them gifts of extraordinary beauty and significance, blankets woven with intricate patterns, jewelry crafted from silver and turquoise, pottery that represented the finest work of Pueblo artisans, and ceremonial items that spoke of deep spiritual meaning. But the most stunning moment came when a group of elder women approached Maria Elena, carrying what was obviously a crown or headdress of incredible beauty and significance. The piece was crafted from eagle feathers, silver, turquoise, and other sacred materials, and its workmanship was so exquisite that it seemed to glow in the dying light of sunset. Singing Woman, who appeared to be the eldest and most respected of the Native American women present, addressed Maria Elena in a voice that carried the weight of ceremonial authority. "Maria Elena Henderson, daughter of two worlds, you have honored your people by choosing a marriage based on love and respect rather than convenience or desperation. Your white husband sees your true worth, and for this reason we name you Queen of the Mountain Peoples, a bridge between the worlds of your ancestors and your chosen home." The coronation ceremony that followed was unlike anything that had ever been witnessed in Colorado Territory. As the assembled Native American representatives chanted and drummed, Maria Elena was formally crowned as an honorary queen, a title that recognized both her mixed heritage and her role as a symbol of successful integration between different cultures. Tommy watched in amazement as his wife was transformed before his eyes from a woman scorned by the local white community into a figure of reverence and respect among the original inhabitants of the land. The irony was not lost on him that the very heritage that made Maria Elena unacceptable to some white settlers was precisely what made her precious to the Native American communities that had known and honored her family for generations. As the ceremony concluded and the celebratory feast began, Chief Running Eagle approached Tommy with an expression of grave sincerity. "Thomas Henderson, you have done something that many white men fail to do. You have looked past the prejudices of your people and recognized the true worth of a woman whose blood carries the wisdom of the ancient peoples. For this, you are honored among us as a brother and friend." The chief went on to explain that Maria Elena's mother, Morning Star, had been a respected healer and spiritual leader among the Taos Pueblo before her marriage to Maria Elena's Spanish father. The story of her daughter's marriage to a white man who loved and honored her despite social prejudices had spread throughout the network of Native American communities in the region, inspiring them to organize this unprecedented gathering to honor the couple. The celebration that followed was a magical blend of traditions and cultures, with Native American ceremonies combined with frontier hospitality as Tommy and Maria Elena shared their home and provisions with their unexpected guests. Stories were told, songs were sung, and bonds were formed that would last for generations. For Maria Elena, the evening was a revelation and a homecoming she had never expected. She learned details about her mother's family and heritage that had been lost to her during her childhood in Santa Fe, and she was formally welcomed into a community that recognized and celebrated her mixed heritage rather than viewing it as something to be ashamed of or hidden. As the night wore on and the celebration continued under the star-filled Colorado sky, word of the extraordinary gathering began to spread to the surrounding ranches and eventually to the town of Sunset Ridge itself. Riders were dispatched to carry news of what was happening at the Henderson Ranch, and the descriptions they brought back were so incredible that many people initially refused to believe them. By dawn, a steady stream of white settlers was making its way toward Tommy's ranch to witness the ongoing celebration and to see for themselves the transformation that had occurred in their community's understanding of Maria Elena Henderson. The woman who had been scorned and dismissed just days earlier was now revealed to be royalty among the Native American peoples of the region. The impact on the white community was immediate and profound. Reverend Morse arrived at the ranch in the early morning hours, his face flushed with embarrassment as he sought out Tommy and Maria Elena to offer a formal apology for his previous behavior. Mrs. Whitman and the other social arbiters of Sunset Ridge followed shortly after, their attitudes completely transformed by the revelation of Maria Elena's true status and heritage. Mrs. Henderson, Mrs. Whitman said, with obvious discomfort, "I must apologize for the way I spoke about you when you first arrived. I clearly didn't understand your background or your significance to this community." Maria Elena received these apologies with the same grace and dignity she had shown in the face of the original prejudice, neither gloating over her vindication nor harboring resentment toward those who had misjudged her. Mrs. Whitman, prejudice is often born from fear of the unknown. Now that you know me better, I hope we can build a friendship based on mutual understanding and respect. As the days passed and the various Native American delegations gradually departed for their home territories, the story of Maria Elena's coronation spread throughout Colorado Territory and beyond. Newspapers picked up the tale, and it was retold in mining camps, farming communities, and city parlors as an example of the complex cultural dynamics that characterized life on the American frontier. For Tommy and Maria Elena, the experience had transformed their marriage and their place in the community in ways they could never have anticipated. Maria Elena was no longer seen as an unfortunate choice made by a desperate bachelor, but rather as a woman of remarkable heritage and character who had honored their community by choosing to make her home there. Tommy, meanwhile, found his own status elevated by association with his extraordinary wife. The man who had been mocked as Virgin Tommy was now respected as someone who had possessed the wisdom and character to recognize true worth when others had been blinded by prejudice. The changes in their relationship with the town of Sunset Ridge were dramatic and lasting. Maria Elena was invited to join the Ladies' Auxiliary, asked to contribute to community events, and consulted on matters ranging from gardening to cultural education. Her knowledge of both Spanish and Native American traditions proved valuable in various practical and social contexts. More importantly, the story of their marriage became a symbol of the possibility of understanding and cooperation between different cultures and communities. Other mixed heritage individuals in the region found themselves welcomed more readily into white society, while white settlers began to develop more respectful relationships with their Native American neighbors. Tommy and Maria Elena went on to build one of the most successful ranches in Colorado Territory, combining Tommy's practical knowledge of cattle and land management with Maria Elena's understanding of sustainable agricultural practices derived from her Native American heritage. Their partnership became a model for other frontier marriages, demonstrating how mutual respect and shared values could create relationships stronger than those based purely on social expectations or physical attraction. They raised 4 children who grew up fluent in English, Spanish, and several Native American languages, serving as interpreters and mediators in various diplomatic and commercial contexts. The Henderson Ranch became known throughout the region as a place where people from different cultures could meet on equal terms and work together toward common goals. As the years passed and Colorado Territory evolved toward statehood, the story of Maria Elena's coronation became part of the local folklore, told and retold as an example of how appearances could be deceiving and how true worth often lay hidden beneath surface prejudices. The crown that had been placed on her head that extraordinary evening was preserved as a family heirloom, a reminder of the night when 200 Native Americans had transformed a mocked bride into an honored queen. Tommy lived to see his wife's heritage become a source of pride rather than shame, and he never ceased to marvel at the wisdom of the choice he had made in marrying a woman who others had judged unworthy. Their love story became legendary throughout the West, proof that the best marriages were built not on social acceptance, but on genuine understanding, respect, and the courage to see beyond the prejudices of one's time and place. The wooden sign that was eventually erected at the entrance to their ranch bore a simple inscription that captured the essence of their remarkable journey: Henderson Ranch, founded 1887 by Thomas and Queen Maria Elena Henderson, where love conquered prejudice and 2 worlds became one. If this incredible story of love triumphing over prejudice and the power of recognizing true worth has inspired you as much as it has inspired me, please take a moment to like this video and share it with others who need to be reminded that real beauty lies in character, not appearance, and that true love sees past surface differences to the heart beneath. Subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories from America's frontier, and hit that notification bell so you never miss these tales of courage, love, and the triumph of human dignity over ignorance and hatred. Remember that each of us has the power to be like Tommy Henderson, choosing to see the true worth in others when the world around us is blinded by prejudice and fear. Until next time, may we all have the wisdom to recognize royalty when we see it, regardless of how others might judge appearances.